I never imagined that the life I built with my own hands would take me down a path that would test my soul. My name is James Carter. To the world, I am a successful man, a millionaire, a symbol of triumph. But to myself, I am simply a man who learned how to endure. My story began in the quiet corners of struggle. I was not born into wealth. My father was a factory worker who never had the chance to live his own dreams, and my mother was a woman who stitched clothes until her eyes blurred from the dim light of a small lamp. From them I inherited the hunger to survive. Every coin mattered, every opportunity had to be seized. I took on jobs no one else wanted, sweeping floors, carrying boxes, answering calls with a smile that disguised my exhaustion. Somewhere deep within me burned the belief that I was destined for more. I studied late at night, read books no one thought I could understand, and slowly carved a path out of nothing. Eventually, hard work paid off. One business venture turned into another, small victories multiplied, and before I realized it, my bank account told a story far greater than the boy who once ate stale bread for dinner. But success is a strange companion. It gives you freedom yet locks you in golden cages. It surrounds you with noise, yet the silence afterward is unbearable. I had mansions where lights glowed all night, but I had no one waiting for me when I returned. I had cars that purred like beasts, but no hand holding mine in the passenger seat. The applause of strangers was deafening, yet when it faded, I felt like a man standing alone on a mountain top, wind screaming in my ears. Loneliness crept into my veins like cold water, numbing everything. I told myself it was enough, that money was company, that achievements were family. But in the quiet of my nights, I knew I was lying. That was when Emily entered my life. It was not planned, not calculated. Fate, if such a thing exists, placed her in my path on a night I expected nothing more than another round of artificial laughter. The gala was filled with the usual suspects, men in tuxedos who measured their worth by the weight of their watches, women in gowns who wore smiles like weapons, ready to charm and wound in equal measure. I stood there, glass of wine in hand, pretending to listen to a conversation about investments I had already mastered. My mind drifted, tired of the act. And then I saw her. She was unlike anyone in that glittering hall. She was young, barely 18, her presence so unpolished that it was almost a rebellion against the staged perfection around her. Her hair cascaded in soft waves, golden under the chandelier's glow, and her eyes, they had a light I had forgotten existed. While others spoke in rehearsed tones, her laughter rang out genuine, clear, and unashamed. She didn't seem impressed by the luxury, nor intimidated by the powerful. She was simply herself. That I don't know what pulled me to her, but I found myself walking across the room, leaving behind half-finished sentences and the shallow nods of people who pretended to know me. I introduced myself, half expecting her to react like the rest, curiosity first, calculation second. But Emily smiled, not with awe, not with expectation, but with a warmth that disarmed me. "You're James Carter," she said softly. "I've read about you." There was no greed in her voice, no hunger for what my name carried. Instead, there was curiosity, as though she had stumbled across a character from a storybook who now stood in front of her. We talked. Hours passed in minutes. She told me of her love for books, how she liked to read stories that transported her into worlds she could never visit. She confessed she loved flowers more than jewelry, long walks more than limousines. And for the first time in years, I felt like someone was speaking to me, not to my wealth. That night marked the beginning of something I could not have predicted. I found myself seeking her presence again and again. I invited her for dinners, not the kind filled with business partners and calculated smiles, but private, quiet evenings where she could talk and I could listen. I would take her to the finest restaurants, but she would end up playing with her food, distracted by a simple song playing in the background. When I gifted her a bracelet, she thanked me politely but seemed more excited by a wildflower I picked on the way to meet her. The more time we spent together, the more layers of myself I rediscovered. With her, I laughed freely, without the shadow of reputation. With her, I could be vulnerable, share stories of the boy I once was, the boy who believed love was possible. She listened with eyes wide, never mocking, never calculating. Her innocence felt like sunlight streaming into a darkened room, and I basked in it, greedy for more. Did I remember one night on my balcony, the city stretched beneath us in a sea of glittering lights. I stood beside her, the cool breeze carrying the scent of jasmine from the garden below. She leaned on the railing, her hair catching the wind, and turned to me with an expression that froze me in place. "James," she whispered, her voice trembling yet firm, "I don't care about your money. I don't want it. I just want you." Those words carved themselves into my heart. I had heard countless declarations before, empty promises of loyalty in exchange for the shine of my fortune. But from her lips, those words rang true. I believed her. I wanted to believe her. And from that moment, I surrendered the walls I had built. I let her in. Time carried us forward like a gentle river, and before I knew it, I could no longer imagine my life without Emily. The thought of losing her clawed at me with a fear I had never known. It was then that I made the decision that would change everything. I would marry her. The proposal had to be as unforgettable as the love I felt. I rented the rooftop of the tallest hotel, where the stars seemed close enough to grasp. The night was velvet dark, pierced by diamonds of light above us. A string quartet played softly, their music weaving through the air like a promise. I dropped to one knee, the ring catching the moonlight, and asked her to be mine forever. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she whispered yes, her voice breaking with emotion. I slipped the ring onto her finger, and in that instant, the world fell away. There was only her and me, two souls binding themselves with a vow spoken not just in words but in hearts. For the first time in my life, I felt whole. The weeks that followed became a whirlwind of preparations. The wedding had to reflect the depth of my feelings. Every detail was considered, thousands of roses ordered, a choir rehearsed to perfection, a cathedral book that could echo with eternal vows. A silver limousine was polished to shine like liquid metal under the sun. My family watched, some with genuine happiness, others with skeptical eyes. They whispered doubts about her age, about her intentions. But I silenced those doubts with the stubborn conviction of a man in love. I told myself that they could not understand what I felt, that love needed no defense. Emily seemed radiant through it all. She moved through the preparations with grace, her smile steady, her hand always reaching for mine. At night, I would lie awake imagining her walking down the aisle toward me, her white dress glowing, her eyes locked on mine. I thought of the vows we would exchange, of the promise to be together until time itself grew weary. My heart raced with anticipation, and sleep often eluded me. Finally, the day arrived. The sun rose golden, blessing the city with warmth. The limousine carried me through streets where strangers paused to watch, their faces filled with admiration. I felt like a king being carried toward destiny. When Emily stepped out, the world seemed to pause. Her gown shimmered like woven starlight, her veil delicate as morning mist. Gasps rippled through the crowd, and I knew they saw what I saw, perfection. The ceremony was a blur of beauty and joy. The choir sang, voices rising like angels. The rings slipped onto fingers that trembled with promise. When I kissed her, the world erupted in applause, but all I knew was the softness of her lips, the warmth of her hand in mine. I whispered in her ear, promising to protect her forever, and she whispered back words that made my heart ache with love. That evening, we celebrated with laughter, music, and endless toasts. Family and friends cheered, their doubts silenced by the sheer force of our happiness. I danced with her, holding her close, my mind painting pictures of a lifetime together. For me, that day was the summit of joy, the realization of a dream I thought I had buried long ago. As I held her hand and looked into her eyes, I believed I had found my forever. I could not have known that beneath the perfection, beneath the vows and the laughter, a truth waited in silence, ready to unravel everything I had built. But that night, I was blind to it. I was a man in love, lost in the glow of what I thought was destiny. The celebration lasted deep into the night. Guests danced and clapped, glasses clinked, and the sound of joy filled the hall. Everywhere I turned, I saw smiles and laughter, but my focus never strayed from her. She was the center of my world, radiant in every way, her laughter ringing like music above the noise. She clung to my arm as if I were her anchor, and I held her as if letting go meant falling into an abyss. People congratulated me, patting my back, shaking my hand, calling me the luckiest man alive. I believed them. In that moment, I felt untouchable, as though fate itself had chosen me for a life no tragedy could pierce. Later that night, when the guests had departed and the last echo of music faded, we returned to the quiet of our suite. The limousine's ride was smooth, city lights streaking past like a dream. Emily leaned against me, her head resting on my shoulder, and I remember whispering how beautiful she looked, how grateful I was to call her my wife. She smiled softly, eyes glistening, but there was a shadow in them I dismissed as exhaustion. After all, it had been a long day. I kissed her forehead and told her the best was yet to come, but in the quiet moments after the wedding, when laughter had stilled and the world was reduced to just us, the universe began to shift. Though I could not sense it then, the ground beneath my joy was fragile, and each step forward brought me closer to the edge of revelation that in those days leading up to the wedding, I had been consumed by preparations, yet small details had escaped me, her sudden silences when asked about her past, the way she sometimes turned away when conversations grew too intimate. I had dismissed them as shyness. She was young, I told myself, untouched by the world's cruelties, and perhaps her innocence was what made her retreat when faced with probing questions. I wanted to protect her, not interrogate her. Love, after all, is trust. And I trusted her completely. On the night of our vows, that trust felt unshakable. The memory of her walking down the aisle was carved into me as if by fire. She moved slowly, each step like the stroke of an artist painting perfection into existence. I can still recall the trembling of her hands when I slid the ring onto her finger, the warmth of her breath as she whispered her vows. Her voice broke at one point, and I thought it was emotion. Now, when I look back, I wonder if it was guilt, if it was fear pressing against her chest, threatening to escape in words she dared not speak, but I was blind. Blind by choice, perhaps. Sometimes love isn't about what we see, but what we refuse to see. And I refused to see anything but my dream taking shape before me. After the ceremony, when the guests had gone, I found myself staring at her across the empty hall as the staff cleaned up. She was still in her dress, veil slightly crooked, cheeks flushed with fatigue. I walked over, gathered her into my arms, and whispered, "You're mine now. Forever." She looked at me then, eyes wide, lips parting as if to respond, but she said nothing. Instead, she buried her face in my chest. I held her tightly, never imagining that silence could be louder than words. The days that followed should have been a honeymoon of bliss. And in many ways, they were. We traveled to places most only dream of. Paris, where we walked along the Seine and watched the city's lights shimmer on the water. Venice, where gondolas carried us through silent canals, her laughter echoing against stone bridges. Santorini, where sunsets turned the sea into molten gold, and she clutched my arm as if she feared the beauty might vanish if she blinked. I showered her with gifts, not to impress but to see her eyes light up, to hear her soft gasp of surprise, yet beneath the joy, there were moments, fleeting, fragile, when something felt amiss. At night, when I reached for her, she sometimes turned away, murmuring excuses of fatigue. In conversations about the future, she spoke in vague terms, never anchoring her dreams in details. And when I asked about her childhood, her family, her past, she would hesitate, then deflect with a smile or a kiss that silenced my questions. I mistook those silences as mysteries to be unraveled in time, believing love would eventually unlock all doors. Still, I felt restless. Not with her, but with myself. It was as though some instinct deep inside me sensed a shadow lurking, though my heart refused to acknowledge it. Instead, I drowned that instinct with devotion. I told myself love demanded faith, not suspicion. And so, I gave her everything, my trust, my name, my future. The night before the wedding, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. My heart raced with anticipation, images of her walking down the aisle replaying in my mind like a film I had watched 1,000 times but could never tire of. I thought of the life ahead of us, the children we might have, the home filled with laughter and warmth. I prayed silently, thanking whatever force ruled the universe for bringing her into my life. On the morning of the wedding, I stood before the mirror adjusting my tie, my reflection both a stranger and a friend. The man looking back at me was strong, confident, wealthy. Yet beneath it all, he was still the boy who once dreamed of love in a world too harsh to offer it. As I walked toward the limousine, my heart pounded with a rhythm both terrifying and exhilarating. When Emily emerged from the bridal suite, my breath caught. She was radiant, her gown flowing like a river of light, her veil framing a face that seemed sculpted by grace itself. Every eye turned to her, but she looked only at me. And in that gaze, I found everything I had ever sought. The limousine ride to the cathedral was surreal. The city seemed to bow before us, strangers pausing to admire the spectacle. I held her hand the entire way, squeezing it as if to assure myself she was real. She smiled, though behind that smile I glimpsed something I could not name. Was it nervousness? Was it fear? I brushed it aside, reminding myself that every bride feels a tremor of anxiety before forever begins. The ceremony unfolded like a dream. The music swelled, the vows were spoken, the rings exchanged. When I kissed her, it felt as though the world itself paused to witness our union. Applause erupted, echoing through the cathedral, but in that instant, I heard nothing but the pounding of my heart. That we walked back down the aisle as husband and wife, my arm around her, her fingers clutching mine tightly. I looked into her eyes and saw tears glistening there. I thought they were tears of joy. How could I have known they were tears of something else entirely? That night, as the celebration ended, I carried with me a heart overflowing with gratitude. The man who once knew loneliness more intimately than love now held the promise of forever in his hands. I believed nothing could touch that happiness. I believed the story of my life had finally reached its perfect chapter, but I was wrong. Even now, as I recall those moments, I can still feel the echo of that joy, sharp and bright, before it shattered. For in the shadow of that perfect wedding, truth was waiting, patient and silent, ready to emerge when I least expected it.